called a super. In Chicago, we have 5 super tall buildings. We're going to get up close and personal with 3 of them. The Council of Tall Buildings also identifies buildings greater than 6,000 meters tall, or roughly 2,000 feet, are called megatalls. There are none of those in the United States. However, in Asia, and they're in Saudi Arabia, they're in Dubai, they're in Malaysia, and they're in China. Megatalls, over 2,000 feet tall. There's one currently being built also in Saudi Arabia. We're going to see the architect for those 2 buildings a bit in our trip. Now, as we head out of the Ogden Slip for our good friend William Butler Ogden, we're going to go underneath the bridge. We're a trip that's on a river, and so we're going to go under a lot of bridges. We're under 26. This bridge doesn't move. This is a stationary bridge. It's part of the Lakeshore Drive complex. However, only 2 of our bridges that we're going to go underneath are non-movable. All the other bridges are movable. Now, on the right side of the boat, you'll see an area, a grassy area. This is going to be a public park. This is going to be called DuSable Park. And it's going to be completed along with that building site we just saw, 400 North Michigan. Now, you're going to see a lot of things in Chicago named after DuSable. DuSable was recognized as the first non-indigenous settler in Chicago. DuSable has a great story. He was a Frenchman, his mother was Haitian. He was a trader, a merchant, and he came to Chicago up the Mississippi River, up the Illinois River to Chicago in the latter part of the 18th century, around 1780, 1790, and forms a trading post. He marries a Potawatomi woman. Her name is Kittihawa, and together, Catherine. And together they have 2 children, Jean and Roxanne. You're going to see DuSable's name on a couple of other things. Not only this park, but that expressway, Lakeshore Drive, is DuSable Lakeshore Drive. When we go underneath the Michigan Avenue Bridge, that bridge is also DuSable. So, if you get a chance, go to the south side. There's a DuSable Museum of Black History that you might find interesting too. You folks at U of C, you folks from Harvard, if you're working with U of C, it's right across from Campus Cottage. Now, there's 2 years I want to have you keep in mind. They're a long time ago, but relevant to our story today. First off, it's 1848. In April of 1848, the canal is opened up. Now, the canal comes from the Chicago River down to the Illinois River and down to the Mississippi. It connects the upper part of the Midwest all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. That's in April. In October, the first train comes to Chicago. That's October 1848. It's the Chicago Western Railroad. It's the one I mentioned earlier, the one that our good friend William Butler Ogden was our owner of. The other year that's really important is 1852. 1852 is important because it's the train that comes up from the south. It's the Illinois Central, out of Mobile, Alabama, coming up to Chicago. And its attorney is William Douglas. Now, you might know about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. This is Douglas, he's a Southerner. He lives in Illinois. He marries a woman from North Carolina. Her father's from Mississippi. As a part of the wedding, he inherits as her dowry a plantation of over 100 slaves in Mississippi. An odd place for a northern senator to be. Anyway, the Illinois Central comes up here and does a deal with the city of Chicago that Douglas negotiates. And what he does is they will dig a breakwater so that this mouth of the river doesn't silt up. In exchange, we trade the south bank of the river. The city of Chicago gives the Illinois Central the south bank of the river. That will come in importance in a second here. Just passed underneath the 1937 Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial Bridge. For you history majors, it's called the Quarantine Speech. Roosevelt came here and spoke about the pending future of Second World War. The Quarantine Speech got him in trouble for a couple of years, but it ended up being perfect. On the left side of the boat, we can see people moving around the Chicago Riverwalk. The Riverwalk starts out as a piece of land donated to Chicago by the Illinois Central, later part of 1979. This river becomes officially a part of what cities is going to be all about in 2002. And it's all properties that are developed along either bank of the Chicago River have to include a river walk to allow all Chicago citizens access to the river and to the pleasantries of the river. Now, we were not always that kind to this river. Chicago was basically treated like a slid trench. In the 1850s, there were outbreaks of cholera. And so it was a pretty nasty body of water. Not treated with a lot of regard, really until recently, until really in the last about 80 years. And you'll see evidence of that. Riverwalk, however, gets a shot in the... Here we are on the first day of the DNC, when Barack Obama was president of the United States, elected president of the United States. He gave $250 million to the city of Chicago to help create this Riverwalk. You will see evidence of that pretty much from Michigan Avenue all the way to Lake Street. Now, on the left side of the boat, we see looks like a black and silver rectangle. That building is from a local architect. His name is Harry Weiss. Harry Weiss grew up in Evanston and went to MIT and Yale for his postgraduate work, served in the U.S. Navy, returned to Chicago, worked for Skidmore, Owens & Merrill, and went out on his own in the late 1950s. Harry really fancied himself a nautical man, a sailor, and so in his buildings you'll see a lot of evidence of nautical elements. In this case, that rectangle is becoming something else. It's becoming a triangle, and that triangle is evocative of a sail. But Harry was also brilliant. And what we see here is for Swiss Hotel, he doubles the amount of rooms with a river view by creating a triangular building, not just a standard rectangular structure. We'll see 4 more buildings from here on our trip. Right next door to it is something you might recognize as a modeling or something that Mies van der Rohe might have done. Well, this is actually by his grandson, Dirk Lohan. Pretty much from this building all the way west, almost all the way to Michigan Avenue, is what we call Illinois Center. Illinois Center gets developed in the latter part of the 1950s by Mayor Daley, who works a deal with the Illinois Central. He couldn't get the land from the Illinois Central. Instead, he develops the air rights. And so what you have here in this area is a development. So between 1965 and 1975, there are 8 buildings that are developed on this plot of land. If a lot of them look Miesian to you, or black and glass boxes, it's because Mies did the original layout for the plan, and his successors followed that plan religiously. Now on the right side of the boat, we look up towards a white building, this white ivory tower. This is called the Wrigley Building. The Wrigley Building was built by P.K. Wrigley, Philip Wrigley. He was a chewing gum magnate. And he built this building here right after the DuSable Memorial Bridge was built in 1920. This is 1921. There are actually 2 buildings here, 21 and 24. This building looks a lot like the leftovers from the World's Fair of 1893. We call this historic revival. In this case, the architect's muse, the architects are Graham Anderson Probst and the wife. The lead architect here is Thomas Beery. He is really channeling the Sevilla Cathedral in Spain, and in particular the Giralda, the bell tower. That's the fancy tower on top. Now let's talk about a little bit about how do you read a building. What we're going to do is talk about the vertical elements. We call those vertical elements piers. We also see horizontal elements that kind of interrupt those vertical elements, right? We call those cornices or ledges. Those ledges break the overall facade into 3 pieces. And what you see here is a base, a shaft, and a top. That's based on a classical Greek or Roman column. Base, shaft, top. That's the Apple Store by Norman Foster and Associates. Steve Jobs worked closely with Foster. Foster was a big part of Jobs' brand positioning. Jobs wanted people to think of Apple as an advanced design firm. He partnered with important architects. We'll see how IBM did the same thing. Now, underneath the bridge and on the right, we're a little closer to the Wrigley Building, and here we see a series of 6 shades of ivory going up. The very tip-top one being as if the sun was always shining on it. But that elevation of gradation of tonality is all about one thing, to make the building feel like it's soaring. Another person saw that and liked it. His name was Walt Disney, and he did that same design feature characteristic with Cinderella's Castle. So the next time you're on Main Street and looking at Cinderella's Castle in the distance, it's from the Wrigley Building. P.K. Wrigley built a gobsmacking bit of branding right there on Michigan Avenue. Here on the right, some say the far right, is the Trump Building. This is the first of our super tall buildings we're going to see. This is 1,380 feet tall. This is by Adrian Smith and from Skidmore, Owens and Merrill. We see this building has these darker elements, horizontal elements. Those darker elements line up with the tall buildings that are its physical partners or neighbors. So the Wrigley Building, the IBM Building, and the Marina City. All of that's telling us this is contextual, meaning it recognizes where this building is. It's different than modernism. We call it postmodernism. Now, here's the father of modernism.
Oh, shit.
On the right side of the boat, we see the IBM Building of 1973. This is by Mies van der Rohe. Now, right alongside of it is a building by his student. This is by Bertrand Goldberg. Goldberg went to school in Germany and studied with Mies in 1933 at 19 years old. His building is 1962. How could that be older than that? Mies's idea is actually very old. It really was developed between the 1920s and 30s. And Mies's idea was always about, I'm going to teach people on how to live in my square buildings. But his students said, hey, wait a second, man. I want buildings that people want to live in. So the student walks away from the master. The Teutonic black box of Mies gives way to these curvilinear, cylindrical forms of residential space. Behind it, an office building, and below it, a marina. This is called work, live, and play. It was an objective to try and keep people in the city of Chicago and not have them move them out to the suburbs. Most importantly, it's not glass and steel. It's reinforced concrete poured on site. What we call reinforced concrete poured on site. You Bostonians, you got a lot of this in Government Center, your City Hall in particular. It's called brutalism. Now, there's another example of brutalism on the left side of the road. At 55 West Wacker, we see a building by Otto Stark. And this is only 16 stories tall, but again, we see the piers rising unbroken all the way to the top, heavily strided. We see the spandrels, those horizontal elements, retreating to the back. We see really a small bit of glass in it. It's not a full glass like Mies's. This is brutalism. Some people don't like brutalism. And so if you want an alternative, here's 2007, Ricardo Bofill, architect from Spain. Look how he incorporates neoclassical elements at the base, all the way up to the top with a pediment, a Greek pediment. That's also an example of postmodernism. It's taking those elements, those national Grecian elements, historical elements from the past, and giving them new meaning. Now, let's go back to 1913, 1914. This is by Niemans and Fellows. This is the Reed Murdoch Wholesale Distribution Building. This building is all about the horizontal. It's using a Roman brick, which is a lower profile than its height. And you'll also see the spandrel is coming over on top of those piers. This is Prairie School. And so Niemans worked for Sullivan, and so did Wright, and that's where they got this idea of the horizontal. So when you're down at University of Chicago and you see the Robie House and you say, wow, that's really a horizontal building, it's all coming out of that. Now, Reed and Murdoch were from Canada, but they went to Iowa first and came to Chicago. Here's another couple of Iowans. This is John Picard and William Chilton. They are an architecture firm. This is 2016. They are currently based in New Haven, Connecticut. What these guys do is green building practices in super tall buildings. And what they've done here with the skin of the facade is it maximizes sunlight inside, but minimizes the amount of solar gain. And then they also draw water from the river, using it to cool their HVAC systems, driving the cost of electricity down, and returning that water chilled, as well as cleaner than when it took it out of the river. Picard and Chilton, we'll see another example of their work. Here on the right side of the boat, this is the Merchandise Mart. I know wow is the right word, because when this was finished in 1928-29, this was the largest building in the world. This was bigger than the Pentagon. This is 4 million square feet. This was built for Marshall Field. Marshall Field had a retail business and a wholesale business. This was the wholesale business. And that was fine up until 1938 when it went broke. Joe Kennedy, another connection back to you Bostonian guys, came to Chicago in 1945 and bought this building. He paid half the cost of construction costs. Now, he not only got a super deal on the price, but he also demanded that this adjacent land be included in the overall deal. So all of this land becomes Kennedy land. The Kennedy family operates the merchandise mart up until recently, within the last 15 years. It's now run by Vornado. They still own the land. Recently, they developed the land here on the right side of the boat. What we see are two glass towers right here. The one dead ahead is the Salesforce building. This is a commercial office tower. And then over here to the right of it, you see Wolf East. This is a residential building. These two buildings might look like that Picard-Chilton building because these are by Caesar Pelli. Caesar Pelli was the head of the architecture program at Yale. Chilton worked for Pelli for 15 years. Now, as we come along here, we see a river walk, right? And along that balustrade, we see a circle with a Y in it. That's basically the Chicago logo. And that logo comes from what we're doing right now. We're moving out of the main stem of the river, and we're making a right turn to go up the north branch. That's the south branch over there. So this is effectively a Y. You'll see that Y in a lot of locations around the city. If you go do anything at the Chicago Theater, you'll see it right in the front of the marquee. As we cruise along here on the right side of the boat, we see the first of the three buildings that were developed on Wolf Point. Now, Wolf Point was originally the city center. It was upstream from the mouth of the river. This is where the trading posts were, where there was lodging and taverns. But in 1848, when the canal was open, this all got super dredged. And so all of this land got increasingly taken away, and city center moved down to downtown Chicago as we know it today. This building's 2016. This is by BKL. This is by Kerwin and Lowenberg. This is the first building that went up here. Can you imagine taking a position on this beautiful residential building and you're enjoying your place in the 20th floor and you're looking out your window and suddenly the Salesforce tower is in your way? Oops. Didn't get the memo. Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, we'll see here in a second here. On the right side of the boat, sometimes we say a tall building is just a bridge standing on its end. Well, here's a bridge standing on its end. That's the 1905 railway bridge. This railway bridge was built in 1905. It's designed by Joseph Strauss, the man who designed the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, where this train would lead you to is that opening underneath the building. And that's where Joe Kennedy, in building the Apparel Mart 1976, built over the air rights of the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. And you can see right underneath there how that went across. Now on the left side of the boat, this spot right here is 1848, October 1848. When the railroad first comes to Chicago, this is where the Chicago Northwestern train ended. It was 1852 before a pontoon boat was put here that allowed rail traffic to go out on the north bank of the river. Now, as we pass underneath this single-leaf bascule bridge, the Kinsey Street Bridge, on the left side of the boat, I just want you to look at this tall tower. This is a 40-story tower. We're going to talk about it in greater detail, this reinforced concrete building. What I want you to look at is how the balconies are integrated into the structure of that building, into the design of that building. You know, it's almost as though a series of scallops move across the facade, right? Hold that thought. On the right side of the boat, this is 1980. This is the East Bank Club. Today, this is a health club of 10,000 people. Super end, high-end health club in Chicago. In 1980, I got my degree in 1977 from University of Illinois. We were all running around here because all these law things were in here. There are all sorts of art galleries. This was kind of our Soho in Chicago. And when this came in, it was a huge gamble and a huge bet, but it definitely took off. It was certainly helped when Oprah opened up Harpo's that side. You can't see it, just on what we call River West. But when Oprah opened up, this became where all the great and near great, all the beautiful hang out, all the way up the river here. And it radically changes. All of those 7-story buildings, those Chicago Mercantile buildings, were all along here, all those lofts. Art galleries went away and, they moved to another place. But here's another one on the right side of the boat, another 7-story Chicago Mercantile building, also by Nimmons and Fellows. We saw their building on the main stem of the river. This is 1907 to 1909. So you don't see any evidence of Prairie School in this. This is before all that. And what we're going to primarily be looking at is like the back end of it. Primary entrance is where the architect and the developer spent all the money on expensive brickwork. This building gives you an example, though, of how this is all adaptive reuse. This is residential, and you can see these balconies attached to the outside. Now, Chicago has some pretty crummy weather half the year, but when it's nice out, like sure, today is a heck of a day, you want to be out on this little balcony. And if you're in the business of renting space for people to live in, you've got to offer them some kind of access to outside. So whether it's a balcony or a back porch or a stoop or a patio, it's a big part of what Chicago is. But it becomes the architect's challenge, right? How does the architect sort out to make a visually, aesthetically pleasing building with these appendages that are hanging off of it? We'll see more of this. Now, as we're moving along, again, on the right side of the boat, we see a building. Looks like another bridge standing on its edge. This is Lucien Lagrange. This is 1983. This is a 24-story residential tower. This building is called deconstructivist. So we've seen brutalism, this is deconstructivist. All this basically still kind of within the same modernist period, right? Now, this building is called deconstructivist because it's kind of a hodgepodge, a lot of random elements. We don't see kind of the usual grid-like precision and continuity that you get from Mies. His lot was compromised, and he had to come up with this unique shape. The south side of that building's on Huron Street. Go 4 blocks that way, you'll go to Mr. Beef and see where the movie, the TV show The Bear came from. To the left of that is a building by Minoru Yamasaki. Now, Minoru Yamasaki was the architect of the Twin Trade Centers in New York City. Here, he moves the center of the building off to the left and the right, opening up the center of that section for his client. His client, Montgomery Ward. Who knows what Montgomery Ward means or even is? Okay. Montgomery Ward is Amazon 1.0. Montgomery Ward starts a catalog business in 1873. From 1873 to 1900, he's the largest catalog retailer in the world. And he's based here in Chicago. Obviously, it's easier to ship stuff east and west from Chicago than anywhere else. He grows that business. His offices and headquarters are down on Michigan Avenue all the way through the end of this period, where 1900, where Sears Roebuck catches up with him. So his business starts to get tough. He moves off of expensive Michigan Avenue and moves up here to this north side area. This building here on the right side, where we see balconies attached to the side of the building. It's been adaptively reused for residences. This is the administration building. Montgomery Ward opens in 1928. So he moves off of expensive Michigan Avenue, comes up here, and settles this. Now what we see here are some examples of Art Deco. And what Art Deco is signaling to us here is that this is a fashion right retailer, that they understand how you might want to wardrobe your home, or yourself, your family. The ground floor was a full-line store. This building, like I said, done internally by a guy named Macaulay. Not especially flamboyant, a little bit of applied decorative, but that's about it. Across the street is a much more interesting story. This is Chicago Avenue. It's the only other bridge that doesn't move. The building on the right is 1905, 1907. This is by a firm, and their job was to develop the catalog distribution building for them. This is the first reinforced concrete in Chicago. This is 1.5 million square feet, and it's all the way down. This building shows that evidence of the Prairie School in it, these brown brick piers, or spandrels rather, running all across the facade. And on the lower levels, we see non-representational art. These guys weren't about going into the past and looking for Greek or Roman inspiration. They're creating something for the period that they're in right at the time. Below it, the spandrel is really highly evocative of Louis Sullivan's work. Now, as we make a turn here at the north bank, of the north branch of the Chicago River. Looks like we have an island here. It's actually an island only because of our good friend William Butler Ogden. In 1858, he came up here and dug this channel. He discovered that it was clay rich, and as a result, he created a brick factory up here, built the bricks that built downtown Chicago. That canal right now is only 3 feet deep. It's currently being developed as like a laboratory or an urban waterway. The natural north branch of the river goes there, and you can see in the distance Material Services. It's a hard-working river still. Barges full of concrete and cement, ready for a job site. Now that empty island that we're looking at is poised for development, and we see the developer's name. This one in particular is a Western Canadian company called Onni, O-N-N-I. They have that parcel as well as this. This parcel was originally the Chicago Tribune's distribution center. It doesn't do that anymore. And Onni has control over it to develop it. But there's developments all up the Chicago River, all the way up to 2400 North. They're miles up from us here. And all of these things are waiting on which one of the developments happens. Where will the money land? When do we begin to develop? Now, along the way, has anyone been to the salt shed? Salt shed, a former salt